Hi, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm sure that a bunch of people will pop in later for the presentation like they always do. But you came here for a presentation and so you will have one. Today's webinar is on evidence synthesis for market access in the EU. So with the EU, that's several countries, several regions with the differences in between. Today we're going to focus on some experience we have from the South. So that's where I'd like to introduce David Integlia, the founder of ISHEO. Well, he's been in the industry for years and he has a wealth of experience in market access, and basically I call him the go-to guy whenever you need a specific market access strategy in Italy, but also in the whole EU. And the second speaker for today will be Susanne Schuurman. She is a market access consultant at AREX Advisor, which is located in Sweden. So she will be representing the Nordics and to show you what that region is like. And before that, she has worked at ICON, a very large firm as well. So she will have lots of experience to share. And feel free to ask many questions as well, because it's not every day that they, basically make themselves available for all kinds of questions. So my name is Nick, I'm in the Netherlands, and I'll be your host for today. But without further ado, then I guess we should start the presentation. We're going to start it off with David Integlia, again from ISHEO, and he's going to kick it off. So good luck, everybody, and welcome, David.
And thanks, Nick, for this presentation. Then what I want to do as a first thing is to present myself. I'm David Integlia. I'm an health economist. We have a PhD in health economics and market access. Actually, what I really like in doing my job is to promote innovative research projects, clinical trial management, HTA report, and evidence-based market access strategies. I believe that training is a means of economic and social progress. I am open to cooperate with people committed to foster innovation in healthcare. And then what I really like to say about myself, that I'm open to use entrepreneurial spirit as a means of mutual empowerment. So I'm open to cooperate, and I want also to thank AREX today for this presentation. So let's go to the topic of today. We wanted to talk about evidence synthesis because it's something that is crucial, is important for to make in place a successful market access strategy in Europe. So let's think a bit at the healthcare market specifics. So in healthcare, price is not determined by supply and demand. We know that. Market has to be regulated. Unlike food or other technology, health cannot be shared or traded between individuals. Then the payers are committed to purchasing health for the society. And the impact of treatment and diagnosis can't be fully understood. This is very important to understand the topic of today. And then we need evidence to assess the impact and define price and reimbursement schemes. Pricing and reimbursement comes always from limited information. So what does this mean? It means that there are rooms for all stakeholders. So companies, pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, but also patient associations, for example, and institutions to contribute in defining value, determining the most appropriate pricing scheme possible. Since the impact of treatments is always in a sort of uncertainty, we can't fully understand the impacts. We have to build the evidence, and there are rooms for everyone to contribute to do that. So let's think a bit about the concept of value in market access and in the healthcare market. So primarily, objective of evidence synthesis for market access is to define and measure the value of health products and services. But in the economic theory and also in the debate of the value for healthcare, we have two different kinds of theory of value. The first one is called the objective theory or intrinsic theory of value. That is the concept that says that the value of a good or a service is made up from the cost of production of raw materials and the cost for human work needed. So actually the price is linked to the cost of production factors. Then there is another theory that is called subjective theory, where we see that the value of a good or service is the value to achieve desired outcome from the users. So the price is linked with the value of the outcomes. But we said just before that we can't fully understand the value of the outcomes. It's very difficult. So we have to put in place evidence synthesis to achieve the best idea of the impact of a new technology in the market. So what we can say again also is that market access perspective in Europe is very specific, because the value of a drug and other health technology depends on the institutionalized payer's subjective perception. So definitively, we have to think about the subjective theory in order to assess the value of a drug in Europe. And then we need evidence synthesis that strongly contributes to build the perception, this perception. So we have to think always at what the payer think in terms of value. And for sure in Europe, we don't think only at the raw materials cost and the cost of work needed, but we have to assess the impact, because we can reach a good price, we can reach a proper price working on evidence synthesis. So a good strategy of evidence synthesis can also help the company to overcome some barriers in market access. In the healthcare market, we see always the trade-off between price and reimbursement conditions, target populations selection, and then the prescription versus funding procedures. And the typical and potential barriers are to get a non-optimal price level, or non-optimal reimbursement level, or a restriction in the scope of prescription. So actually, through an appropriate strategy of evidence generation and synthesis, the market authorization holder can overcome these barriers. We can say here that the more you think in advance and you plan, you do the strategy to have the proper evidence synthesis, to get the proper evidence to support the value proposition of your drug, the more you get at the end of the story, at the end of the process of market access. So this is very important. In my experience, but I think also in the AREX experience, we see sometimes that companies are late in thinking the strategy of evidence synthesis. They are too late when they are, for example, they already have received the marketing authorization. Then they want to assess the impact on the quality of life of their product. Probably it is too late. So actually, is it very important to work in advance in this sense? So actually, let's talk about the methods for value assessments that are used in Europe. If we think at the payer perspective, we have, of course, comparative efficacy from clinical trials of the medicine. So actually, the main reference is the randomized control trial, but there is an increasing role in patient-reported outcome and other patient-reported data. It is very important to think in advance, to plan an PRO in order to get the assessment of the impact of the drug on the quality of life of patients, for example. And then there are the indirect comparison and network meta-analysis that are not so well appreciated by the European Medicine Agency. We know that. And also are not so much appreciated by other national authorities, but sometimes it's the only reference that you can get in order to have a comparison with your comparators or one of your specific comparators. So also the network meta-analysis, systematic literature review are important in order to have the proper evidence synthesis for your market access strategy. Then, of course, we have the comparative effectiveness from real-life data on use of the medicine. So you have to assess the statistical effect size and the additional benefits. For example, the question is, added value is there or not? Is there only the efficacy added value to be considered in the value proposition of a drug? Not at all. Of course, we have to consider also the safety, the administration routes, the organizational impacts, the quality of life from patient perspective. So we have also to consider transferability of the clinical trial data across jurisdiction and real life. And if all these kind of measurement are met, we can have a premium price that is possible at all level of access. So European level, national level, and also regional level where applicable. We have another kind of value assessment, of course, that is the cost effectiveness, and we can say also cost utility method. So to use an incremental cost effectiveness ratio, and then the cost effectiveness analysis, to use the quality adjusted life year in the perspective of the utility analysis. We all need of that in order to get the proper evidence synthesis for our market access strategy. We have to use this kind of method and analysis not only at European level, but also national level, and where applicable also at regional level. And of course, we have also the budget impact analysis that is very important at national level and regional local level. The question that underlines the budget impact is the intervention affordable in the current payer budget? We have to determine the additional budget needed in order to help the payer to understand the impacts also in their financial resources. Sometimes we want to hide the hand on that. It's not the good strategy. You have to tell. And you have to justify for example, the increasing of cost also in terms of efficacy. This is important. We have to bring this kind of criteria also where these criteria are not so followed, are not so much considered. Yes, so this is my presentation as an introduction of the webinar. And please, Nick. And then Susan. And you are on mute, Nick. Sorry.
So even the host makes mistakes. Right now, this was the introduction by David, as he said, and now we're going to give the word to Susanna Spearman from AREX Advisor. So Susan, we'll put the sheet one forward to your presentation, and please take the floor. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick, and also thank you, David, for the good introduction into this talk today about evidence synthesis. So I will talk a little bit more about evidence synthesis in the Nordics. But before we go into that, I would like to say that I'm here today on behalf of AREX Advisor, as Nick kindly introduced earlier. We are a market access, regulatory, and quality assurance consultancy firm based in snowy Stockholm, Sweden. And we focus on the whole life cycle of the products from the different areas. So from the development to commercialization. And now I want to see if people are all listening and are awake. But before that, I have a poll that I would like to ask you. And that I will start now. Let's see. So have you ever submitted a reimbursement dossier in the Nordics? Because I'm kind of interested to see if what kind of people we have on board today in the group. It's moving a bit in all directions. So I see so far Majority has not submitted any reimbursement dossier yet. It's 6 versus 4 that have. There are some people who do not work in market access. So maybe you will learn something new today about what do we do in market access, what do we think about. But I can see it stays with that the majority do not have. Although 5 of the people have done a submission. So let's wait a little bit yet, since everyone is still answering. But I will go more into details in a bit regarding the Nordics. But I can mention already that when I say the Nordics, officially when you talk about the Nordics, it's Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland. But for the market access perspective, we will focus on the 4 countries, so that's excluding Iceland. So that will be about today. Okay, let's say 58% of the people have not, or maybe not yet, submitted in the Nordics. 25% have, and 70% do not work in market access. Okay, well, that's good to know. Then we will go into the next slide, where I will tell you a little bit more about the similarities and differences in the Nordic reimbursement processes. First of all, when we talk about the Nordics, it's 4 countries that we're talking about, as I mentioned. So that also means that there will be a lot of differences. Even though the countries might be similar in the way that they are set up, with national authorities and regions that are very active, they have their different processes. But something that is similar across the different markets is that they have a separate process when you want to apply for inpatient or an outpatient product. Although it might differ between the countries still. So if you have a drug that is a hospital drug, it might go through a different pathway between different countries. Since we don't have so much time today, I will just highlight a few things that I want you to be aware of when it comes to the Nordic reimbursement processes. So first of all, I think it's interesting and makes Finland also a bit different is that they have the 2-step reimbursement approach. So that means that in your first approach, you will only get the basic reimbursement, and that is 40% coverage. It has also a time limitation. Often it's between 18 months to 2 years, and then you have to renew again. You have to send in more information. They assume that the price is already lowered, so they won't really look into that. But this continues several times, and the more often you do it, the longer the time period actually can be that the reimbursement is valid for, let's say. But yeah, back to the 2 steps. The second step is to apply for special reimbursement. That happens after you have applied for the basic reimbursement. Then you can increase the reimbursement percentage up to 65, or in special cases even 100%. So that's something that makes Finland a bit unique. But then regarding Sweden, what is unique there is that the reimbursement is not indication specific. It could be, but that means that it's a restricted reimbursement. In general, it's reimbursed for the product. And that's different compared to the other countries where you do get indication reimbursement. You do always need to notify TLV if you have another indication coming up, and they will then decide if in certain cases they do want another dossier. When we go to the decision-making criteria, what is new is that all countries are considering cost effectiveness, because Denmark, since 2021, that's this year, January, they also assess now the cost effectiveness for introducing a new hospital drug. Although they do not really want to set any limits to the ISHERs, because they still find politic-wise it difficult to put a price on a patient, they have now introduced the cost effectiveness analysis. And then again, all countries, they will look at severity of the disease, but certain countries such as Norway and Sweden, they have a little bit step forward, because in Norway, they have this more formalized procedure where you need to calculate the severity of the disease, also called the absolute shortfall. And that determines also the willingness to pay eventually for a treatment. So you calculate the severity of the disease of the people with the disease versus the people without, the general population. And also for Sweden, it's one of the 3 principles when they look at the decision making. So therefore, it's also something that you definitely should consider including very well in your dossier. Pricing, last step that I want to mention a bit something about, is that when you don't really go for a reimbursement process, but just want to launch a product, in Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, they have the free pricing system, whereas in Norway, they will always have the reference pricing. They have a basket of 9 countries, and then the average of the 3 cheapest countries that will set the maximum price. I know that I have been giving quite a bit of information here. Before I go to the next slide and go more into the actual evidence synthesis, I want to ask Nick if people have any questions at this stage.
Okay, so again, if should there be any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, and I will read your question if you have a question for Suzanne or for David. And I guess if there are no questions, then we can go back to Suzanne. Okay,
that's good. Then we will go actually more to the evidence requirements. And I think David pointed out very well earlier, and it's very true, we experience the same, that countries or companies in the respective countries are not always have all the evidence available that they need when they're actually going to launch a product. Therefore, I would like to go a little bit more into details what, for example, Finland or Sweden expects when you are going to submit, because sometimes you will need to access certain data, which might take some time before you can get that. So first, let's have a look at the clinical evidence requirements for the countries.
Before we continue, Suzanne, there is a question by Stefan. Do they apply ICER thresholds in the Nordics?
Yes, they do, but not officially, I would say. So, for example, in Sweden, they don't have an official threshold. It can range between 500,000 SEK to 1 million for more rare diseases. But in Finland, they have a little bit more set thresholds. They will prefer between 20 to 30,000 euros. The max would be like 90,000. And that's the same. So as I mentioned before, Denmark doesn't really set the threshold. And for Norway, they also don't have an official threshold. It really depends on each case. So there are some ranges, but nobody, not like, for example, in the UK or in the Netherlands for that matter, where they have quite strict thresholds. No. I hope that answers the questions.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne, for your answer. And please continue. And again, more questions, always welcome.
Definitely. Yes, so when it comes to the epidemiology, then I'm also talking about the patient population that you want to submit for. So make sure that when you are planning to submit in these 2 countries, that you have the expected patient numbers for that specific country. So that also means that if there are any subgroups that you think are more relevant in that country, that you have the data for that. In the Nordics, and especially in Sweden and Finland, we have some databases that you can access with data for diseases, but be aware that this might take some time. You can get the general information quite easily, but if you want any additional information, you will need to contact the registries and databases, and that can take some time. But definitely beneficial to use, because in the end, goes without saying, but all the dossiers, of course, would be better if it's more local to the context of each country. When it comes to the relative efficacy, both countries, of course, prefer head-to-head trial data. That goes in every country, but they do also approve or would use it for their review if you submit any network analysis or indirect treatment comparisons. It all goes with the argumentation that you have towards that, and also all the details that you can give how the analyses are actually done. If you're still in early stages of the development of your clinical trials, then I could recommend to include any clinics in Finland, because the Finnish agency, they would really prefer to have also some Finnish patients included in the trial. So that's something that you can be aware of when you're developing your trial still. Systematic literature reviews are not required in Finland and Sweden. However, of course, they want all the information when it comes to the comparators and a summary regarding that. And in Finland, they also want the whole list of publications. And if some of the publications are not publicly available, they wish you to share that with them as well. So that you can show that all the information, relevant information, has been included about the comparators. And I will make another note about comparators in the next slide regarding health economics. Lastly, as I already mentioned before, the severity of the disease is something that can play a role, and especially with Finland, they can therefore choose conditional reimbursement if you have a subgroup which is more severe, and then they only target that one for the reimbursement. And same for Sweden, they can therefore increase the acceptance of how high the price is, because that's of course what it all goes down to in the end, that the evidence supports the discussion around the price. In addition, for Finland, as I mentioned before, you have that special reimbursement process where you will increase your percentage to 65 or 100%. Then they also want you to include any other new data after your previous reimbursement. So any periodic safety data, any reviews that have been done, open label studies, etc. So the key takeaway that I want to give about all of this is that the more uncertainties you see in the data, it may increase that the agencies will actually go for any subgroups and give only that group the reimbursement. So therefore, it may increase the importance of your subgroup analysis. This was what I wanted to say about the clinical evidence. Are there any questions about what I just said? I know there are a lot going on, but a lot is also expected from the agencies, not me, of course. Nick, is there a question?
No. Wait, no, the question just came in actually. So this is a question by Alex. I'm going to see if I have a very small screen apparently, but if the evidence available is not enough in order to have reimbursement, can any managed entry agreement schemes be used in the Nordic countries? For example, performance-based outcomes?
I know that this is something that is being discussed and ongoing, but this is a bit of a broader topic. So I would suggest I can come back to Alex to give a more detailed answer to that, as that has also more to do with the pricing. So not entirely for now today, but yeah. So there are definitely discussions ongoing there, and some are more flexible.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Suzanne. Alex, I'll be sure to get you guys in touch afterward, and then
Yes,
let's continue.
Thank you. Then the last aspect, because that's normally, of course, the second part of the dossiers where we are talking about health economic evidence. Both countries are ISHEO countries, let's say it like that. So they do look and they do expect you to submit any economic model in terms of cost utility, cost minimization, cost benefit. And then when it comes to the comparator, as I mentioned earlier, both countries expect you to submit the most cost-effective treatment in that clinical practice of that country. So therefore, I also would recommend to have early engagement with clinical experts in the field to understand what is the current standard practice, and then of course also look at what are the treatments then and which one is the most cost-effective. If you want to include several comparators, then for TLV, suggest to have the scenario analysis because they want to see the differences between the comparators. I must note here also that TLV will calculate their own ISER anyway as well, of course, to use that as negotiations for the price in the end. The societal perspective is used in Sweden, and that also includes the productivity loss. That is not the case everywhere else. And in Finland, for example, you can include the productivity loss, it is fine, but they also want you to submit a scenario analysis without it then. So it's not a requirement that you have to, but if you include it, you have to also show it without. Otherwise, they want the health care cost and social welfare cost.
Hi, Suzanne. There's another question, and I'm just going to read it. I'm not sure if I understand it. And the EQ5E-5L, not used yet? A question by Alexandra de Souza.
I understand the question, and it's a good question because so that is regarding the quality of life, and I mentioned here on my slide that the 3L is what I would recommend, and that is because no, it's not really used yet. And I know in certain Nordic countries, such as Norway, they acknowledge that it is possible to submit that. But especially TLV, there are still so many uncertainties that you will end up actually getting so many more questions and critiques than that it will benefit you. So I would suggest that for now, in these countries, use the data for the 3L, not the 5L. Yeah. That was actually what I wanted to tell anyway, so I can go now to the budget impact. You're welcome. Budget impact. So in Sweden, no, you don't have to submit any budget impact model, but they do want you to provide the expected patients that you think will use the drug to quite a certain extent, and the daily cost. And in the end, they will use that to calculate their own budget impact as well. But in Finland, there they do expect you, there you can submit a budget impact, and they also really want you in any case to submit the realistic sales of the current year and of the upcoming 3 years. And why am I saying realistic? Because if the sales are higher than you predicted, they might come back and start to ask you questions because you need to explain what happened there. Real world data, last step, is be recommended, especially for Finland, because when it comes to the renewal process or the special reimbursement process, they really want you to use any Finnish clinical data or like clinical practice data that you have on the dosing, on how long treatment is being used. So make sure that you, when you are gonna you submit your reimbursement, try to also contact any clinics that you can start an agreement with, that they collect the data for you, because you know that you will get those questions in your renewal process anyway. For Sweden, you can use this data for Sweden, you can use the real world data for your economic model as well, because then of course it shows that it's a clinical practice. Registries have this data, often contact them on time, I would say. Something to know about both countries is about the summary of the dossiers. They should be in Sweden in Swedish, and in Finland in either Swedish or Finnish. So you can, let's say, for the ease of it, submit your summary in Swedish for both countries in the dossiers. So I think it's good to be aware that although these are ISER countries, the budget impact definitely plays a more important aspect in the decision making, and that is especially after you get the national reimbursement and you go into the regions where the negotiations will happen much more. So this is what I wanted to give you an overview in this short amount of time that we have today regarding the evidence requirements for Sweden and Finland. Okay.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, but you're not off the hook yet. There is a question by Kaylee or Kylie. Can other PROs be used to show quality of life for market access negotiations?
When it comes to the economic model, then no. And I would say it's more about the severity of the disease in general, if you would go regarding negotiations, where you can use this. I assume that the question is maybe if generic instruments can be used as well, and I would say add definitely the information in your dossier will be accepted, but you always need to have the EQ5D towards it as well. If I don't answer the question entirely, please follow up with me after the webinar, and I can go in more details regarding this.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Suzanne. Like Suzanne said, we hope that answers your question, and otherwise feel free to come back to us. And yes. Let's continue the presentation.
Yeah, I will give it back to David, who will say something more about...
there's another question by Marcello.
I see.
In the price evaluation phase, are there indirect costs and social costs also taken into consideration, and not just direct costs?
Yes, that is correct. I mean, when we're talking about the models, they also look at those aspects. So time that you cannot work, or going to the clinic and stuff like that. Yes, so that's part of the societal perspective and social welfare perspective. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you again, Suzanne, for all your answers.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. No problem. So we can go ahead with the presentation of considering one of the biggest southern country, that is Italy. So I will just have 2 or 3 slides in order to submit to you also what happened in Italy in terms of evidence synthesis for market access. So in Italy, Who are the payers? For sure, the national health services through the national health funds. There is the IFA, that is the medicine agency that will insert the drug in a national formulary. But then there are also the regions. They don't bargain the price, but they bargain the access sometimes, especially for hospital drugs. And then there are hospitals that they have also a list of the drug that they can prescribe or not. And we have two channels, the hospital with the hospital drug and the pharmacy in the hospital, and the territorial pharmacies. Then what happened in Italy in terms of evidence synthesis? The approach of prescriber is sometimes difficult to control by national authorities. Is strong that the system is strongly regionalized, and that there is a differential access into the regions, because every region has a technical committee that has to approve the access of the drug in the hospitals of the region. And then there are tenders at regional level, and each pharmaceutical company has to follow all the rules for the tender. Then what about the payer's perspective?
One second, David.
Yes.
Another question by Marcello.
Yes, please.
In the price evaluation phase, Oh, I'm sorry. This is the same question. My bad.
Okay. No worries. So what is the payer perspective? The payers use primarily efficacy to support decision. So there is a weak orientation to cost effectiveness, we can say, unfortunately. But the payers in the southern country and also in Italy prefer to negotiate lower price versus restriction of drug use to subpopulation. This is only a national level, we can say, in Italy. The managed entry agreement are used, but is needed to increase the use of them. So it's not so well used already. And also this is a shame, but the system is improving. Then the public-private shared registries is difficult to put in place. But also this can be something interesting for the company and the public, in order to understand again the concepts, the proper value of the outcome of the innovation and of the drug or the services. So actually here we can see the flow of the access from a centralized procedure at the European Medicine Agency to the regions. So we see that the European Medicine Agency, through the CHMP opinion, give to the European Commission the possibility to grant the marketing authorization. After that, the drug is in Italy is put in a non-negotiated class C, that is for just a while, for 30 days, not funded by the national health system because it's not negotiated. But nowadays, with the new template of the dossier in Italy, you have to negotiate. You have to submit a national value dossier. Otherwise, you risk to be put in the class C, and then you can't negotiate any price. And there is the possibility that you don't get the reimbursement price. So from 2019, the IFA puts the new criteria of added value. So no more rooms for me to drug in Italy. If you want to bring a new drug in Italy, you have to show an added value compared to competitive drugs. And if there is not an added value, you have to have a lower price than your comparators and competitors. And then, as I was saying before, since this month, we have a new template of the national dossier. That is more, we can say there are more requirements, but I think that can help the company in terms of planning of evidence synthesis. So there we can see that you need in Italy a cost effectiveness analysis, that you need to consider, of course, randomized controlled trial, but also observational studies. You have to consider what is going on in the other countries in Europe and then to show, for example, the state of the access and reimbursement in other countries. Then what happened? You submit the dossier at national level at the Italian Medicine Agency, and then there is a technical commission that approves the use of the drug in the Italian markets. Then there is a committee for pricing and reimbursements that bargain the price, looking at the health economics parts, and so all the part that can assess the value of the drug and bargain a price. Then there is a classification. The administration council of the IFA will approve the decision, and then there is the official balloting. After that, if you ask to the Italian Medicine Agency to grant you the innovation designation through a different template of dossier, then you can enter automatically to the regional prontuary in Italy. Otherwise, you have to follow all the steps to enter also a regional market. And then here we can see a little bit the peculiarity, we can say, of the Italian market access, because it's extremely regionalized, especially for hospital drugs. So the first suggestion is that you have to plan a market access strategy and evidence synthesis that are consistent in all regions. In our experience, we have seen that companies were going to tell different stories in Lombardia and then in Lazio and in other countries. Then the regional requirements are differentiated. You have not the same requirement for every region. There are regions, for example, that has a template, a specific template that you have to fulfill, and there are other regions that doesn't have any kind of template. So our suggestion is that for every region, you have to have a letter of presentation of the product. Then you have to fulfill a regional dossier for all regions, following the requirements of the regions. Where there is not a template, you have to build a template and do the submission. The more information you say you bring, the more you get in terms of market access. So also here, you have to think in advance. And a lot of companies just do this kind of planning of evidence and also the analysis that you need to afford just to bargain the access in the regions too late. So the more you think in advance, the more you get at this stage of the market access process. Then you have, of course, to have regional budget impacts. And you don't have to do an adaptation of the national budget impact that is extremely required in the national dossier. And I was saying, I was listening to Suzanne that said it's not required that in Italy, it's required at national and also regional level. But then you have to work a bit more. The companies has to work a bit more on the budget impact at regional level, because they don't have only to adapt the percentage, the proportion of the national population to the regional one. They have to work and also look at the therapeutic plan that are applied in the region. That makes also, for example, the things and the calculation a bit different than in the budget impact at national level. And then you have to have a dedicated value proposition considering regional context therapeutic plan, as I said. And you have to, I'm talking now not at the marketing phase of the access, but I'm talking about the institutional communication that every company has to do at the regional level in order to get the access of the region, especially for pharmaceutical products. So actually, this is my suggestion for Italian market access and the need of evidence synthesis. And if you have any question, I am completely available.
Good. So thank you as well, David. Before we move on to the discussion and questions, I would like to inform everybody that this is not the first and most certainly not the last webinar we'll be hosting. And we talked a lot about well, evidence synthesis, and there's also such a thing called real-world evidence. And then the question, how do you fit it into your market access strategy? And for everybody who's interested in that, there's a little call to action below the screen that's starting right about now. And if you want to join that webinar as well and receive the information, simply click it once and you're automatically registered, because we already have your data from this webinar. So we look forward to seeing you there again as well. So please do sign up. Looking forward to it. And let's take it back to Suzanne and David for some discussion if you guys have questions. So, questions?
I have a question for Suzanne, actually, and I can go on live now. What about the regionalization in the northern countries? Because actually I see in Italy, and I just I've shown the situation, but then I know also, for example, that Spain is quite similar. What happened in the northern countries?
I'm sorry, David. I'm not sure I fully understand your question.
Yeah, sorry. I just said that in Italy, I see that the system is completely regionalized. So actually, in the process of market access, regions can gain the access. They have to decide. There are therapeutic commission that has to decide if to approve or not the drug. Then, just to be clear, 90% of drugs are approved in all regions. We can considering the hospital one, but the time is completely differentiated. And actually, not all the drugs are approved in the regions. So what happened in northern country about this kind of middle step, we can say, from the national point of view and then the hospital point of view?
Okay, yes, thank you for your explanation. No, I would say that the decisions of reimbursement, they are taken at the top, at national level. It's more that when it comes to the regions is where the negotiations happen, maybe about the price and whether the budget is actually available in the hospitals. So it could still be, if there's no recommendation at national level, then that would mean that at the regional level they don't get any budget to actually use the product. So that is something that is important to be aware of. And otherwise there are some steps that you can of course go directly to have negotiations there, but it's not definitely not as in Italy, where you have so many regions and you need to reapply the dossier each time. It's more regarding the availability and treatment recommendation. Interaction with stakeholders is very important, especially in, for example, in Sweden, you have another council that for the regions will take up any decisions. So yeah, it's more about to the actual footwork in the country than the dossiers again.
Thank you.
Guys, there's a question by actually a comment by Alexandre. He says only Spain and Italy are divided in regions. So apparently we have a similar situation in Spain as well.
Yes.
In this
yeah, in this perspective, indeed. And I mean, even though we have the regions that are strong, it's more about the budgets. That's why I also mentioned that the budget impact becomes so important nowadays, even though the ISERs are the standard to begin with.
Okay.
Okay.
Does anyone?
Yeah, just another question. I'm quite curious. So you can state that the northern country are quite orientated to the cost effectiveness analysis. So they bargain considering cost effectiveness. Or do you think that also in northern country the efficacy is the very important milestone, and then they tend to bargain the price, to lower the price? What is the approach? Not for every region, but in general sense, general approach.
Well, of course, I mean the relative efficacy is from the clinician's perspective also very important. However, I mean price play more role when you talk about actual patients getting it. For example, if I would compare Sweden and Finland, in Finland, they really listen to the recommendation from the top, and then also the drug needs to be effective. Whereas in Sweden, if the price is too high, still the doctors might actually consider not using it. But of course, when you talk about the evidence synthesis, then the efficacy is just as important, I would say. So I wouldn't say that it's really about the ISHEO in itself, but maybe the price down the line.
Exactly.
Next to it's of course being effective, because the doctors, in the end of the day, if you want it to be used, it needs to help the patient.
Yes. Yes, exactly. What I see actually, that the cost effectiveness orientation is not so common as we are ready to think. So just this is was just a curiosity.
Okay. So are there more questions? Because otherwise we're nearing the hour where everybody probably has to get to his or her next meeting. So here's what we usually do. We take it going once, going twice. So I guess if that means that there are no more questions, most of you are still here. So I'm hoping that you thought it was an interesting webinar. We'll be following up with the slides afterward, the replay. And of course, do feel free, of course, to contact us. And for if you really need your product reimbursed tomorrow in the Nordics, please contact Suzanne straight away. Same thing goes for Italy. And well, together they can focus on the entire EU, it seems. Again, for the ones who didn't, please do register for the next webinar if you want to. I'll put it on for one last second. And then let's give it a warm digital applause for David. Thank you, David. Oh,
Thank you.
And Suzanne, and bye everybody, and thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.